My name is Christina Alney, and I am the Director of Government Relations for the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And we are gathered here today to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. We are gathered here today to remember the victims and to let the Chinese Communist Party know that despite their lies and their attempts to erase this brutal massacre from the memory of the world, we have not forgotten. That we will continue to shine a light on the guilty party until they have been held to account for the crimes they committed in the spring of 1989 and for the egregious human rights violations that they continue to commit against their people today. Today, all of us stand united against the totalitarianism of the CCP and for freedom. And that unity terrifies the CCP, and it should. Today, we will hear from an incredible group of speakers who have witnessed the brutality of this regime, who have personally suffered, and who courageously carry the torch of truth and liberty today. I would first like to welcome our Executive Director of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Marion Smith.
Hello. We gather on this solemn anniversary for one reason: to tell the truth about what happened in Tiananmen Square. It is an honor to be here today with survivors of that fateful day, and a privilege to stand in solidarity with all of you in our continued effort to see that the Communist Party is held accountable for its crimes against the people of China. 30 years ago today, China's so-called People's Liberation Army murdered thousands of their own fellow citizens who dared to protest in Tiananmen Square for democracy and against corruption. An opportunity to reform China's communist system in favor of the Chinese people's rights was brutally extinguished. We gather here to remember the sacrifices of those brave Chinese students and workers from 1989 and others around the world since then who have worked to keep their memory alive. It is our duty to make sure that they did not die in vain. We have inherited their struggle, even as Xi Jinping has inherited the leadership of the guilty party, the Chinese Communist Party. Today, the official party line is that the unrest and turmoil in China in the 20th century was worth it, because China is now a rising world power and everyone in China is improving. But in reality, Xi Jinping's socialism with Chinese characteristics today includes the continued destruction of the Tibetan people's culture, the detention of 1 to 3 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, the persecution of house Christians, the mutilation and organ harvesting of Falun Gong and other prisoners of conscience, the forced abortions conducted on mothers who want to keep their babies, the harassment of journalists, attorneys, and artists, the brainwashing of entire new generations of Chinese in schools and through the new social credit system, and the imprisonment of Hong Kong students and booksellers. Here in the United States, more and more Americans are beginning to see the People's Republic of China for what it is: an unreformed communist dictatorship that tramples on human rights inside of China and threatens the peace of the world. To sit by in the face of such travesties is to betray the memory of Tiananmen's victims and our own national interests as Americans. Instead, we must continue their fight serving as their voice and applying maximum pressure on Beijing for reform and accountability. This path to justice begins with telling the truth and dispelling the lies about what has happened. Yet the Communist Party's war on memory is being waged inside and outside of China. They are terrified of people knowing the truth. They know the truth will make people free, and China's tyranny depends on lies and fear. They are most threatened by people knowing the truth about what happened in Tiananmen. It is the deepest, darkest secret of the Chinese state, because that massacre broke the trust of the people and revealed the party system for what it is: a cruel dictatorship solely devoted to its own survival. As we gather here today, there are 127 brave individuals in China who deserve our attention and our support. They're known as the Tiananmen Mothers. Their children were the sons and daughters the Communist Party murdered 30 years ago today. And they, more than anyone else, refused to let the world forget what happened. China's rulers have tried to silence the Tiananmen Mothers every way they can. Although they are elderly, authorities routinely throw them into prison, place them under house arrest, monitor their every movement, block their communications, and disrupt their daily lives. And still, the mothers refuse to back down. As they wrote in a letter earlier this year, the indomitable courage of the children they lost has always been with them, and that is why the mothers will never be silent. The Tiananmen Mothers continue the fight for freedom that their sons and daughters started, and they have inspired a new generation of leaders and freedom fighters across China, in Hong Kong, and around the world to renew the struggle against the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. Today, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation is proud to award the Tiananmen Mothers the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom in recognition of their steadfast courage over these last 3 decades. In an open letter that I referred to, the mothers lamented that time is merciless and the natural laws of life, aging, sickness, and death spare no one. 55 members of their group have already died. While they are confident that others will continue their work, the mothers have also told us that the West has done too little to hold the Communist Party accountable for its actions in 1989. Like the Tiananmen Mothers, those of us who cherish freedom must work to dispel Beijing's lies, but we must also make it clear with actions, not just words, that we will never forget what happened, not least because it happens still. Although they were prevented from traveling and are unable to be here in Washington to receive this award, I know the Tiananmen Mothers are here with us in spirit. Here to receive the medal on their behalf is Miss Mi Ling Sui. Ms. Sui is the Communications Director at Human Rights in China, an organization that promotes the work of Chinese rights defenders. For the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square this year, they have featured the work of the Tiananmen Mothers and launched the Unforgotten Project, a series of profiles telling the stories of the victims of the massacre. Today, Ms. Sui will accept the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom on behalf of the Tiananmen Mothers and offer remarks on their behalf. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Sui.
It is a great honor to receive the the award by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation for the Tiananmen Mothers. We are incredibly encouraged by this affirmation of the work of the Tiananmen Mothers, who have worked for 30 years to press for justice for those killed in the June 4th massacre. They have refused to accept state-enforced amnesia, to document the dead, to gather evidence of the crimes committed against unarmed civilians, simply for exercising their fundamental rights to assemble and to express their aspirations for a cleaner government and a better China. I want to read the message that we received a few days ago from one member of the Tiananmen Mothers. Somehow she managed to get through the firewall to watch some of the material, to read some of the material we have in our Unforgotten project. She said, "Seeing the stories about victims and families made me feel so bad, because I imagine that in the outside world, there must be all sorts of commemorative activities marking the 30th anniversary of June 4th. But inside China, it is like a stagnant pool. We are being monitored." But she ended with a very hopeful message. She said, "I heard that more than 100 people are being forced to leave Beijing. You can see from this how the government is afraid of the power among civil society to lift the lid on the case of the June 4th massacre. By awarding the Medal of Freedom to the Tiananmen Mothers, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation recognizes that force in the Chinese civil society. I urge everyone to send a message of support to the Tiananmen Mothers. You can do that by going to our Unforgotten website and enter your message in the What You Can Do section. For civil society actors under assault, every single message of support will be a source of strength. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mi-Ling. I would now like to call up a champion for human rights and democracy for people all over the world, Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman Smith has been serving in the House since 1981, and he is the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, is the ranking member on the Congressional Executive Commission for China, recently serving as the co-chair, and he has led innumerable initiatives to support democracy and freedom, especially for the people of China. Congressman Smith.
Christine, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. And I look around and I see some of the great leaders of the democracy movement, the human rights movement in China, Chen Quanzhen, Wei Jingshang, so many men and women who have put their lives on the line, have paid a horrific price, have endured torture, all trying to bring a better, more focused human rights policy into the People's Republic of China. So thank you for those sacrifices, which someday, and I pray someday soon, will lead to a free and democratic China. Let me also say, someday China will be free, and they will look back at the heroes of Tiananmen Square, and they will know why that freedom cost so much, but was well worth that price. I have talked to so many people who were there, Chai Ling, just so many people who suffered again, but they all have that dream and that vision of fundamental human rights and democracy for China. Under Xi Jinping, we've seen a marked deterioration in the human rights situation. On the religious front, whether it be the Falun Gong, Tibetan Buddhists, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, or the Christians, even the officially recognized Patriotic Church and Three Self movement, all are under a new and more aggressive siege by Xi Jinping. He has declared war on religion, and world leaders, including in this capital, need to speak out boldly and unambiguously against this attack against people of faith. It was mentioned earlier, and I want to thank the victims of communism for reminding us that the one thing that communism produces are political prisoners. I liked the original comments made a moment ago. The crime against women of forced abortion and forced sterilization is unprecedented. You will recall at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, forced abortion was construed to be a crime against humanity for what the Nazis did to the Polish women. It is going on today in the PRC, and Xi Jinping oversees all of that. We will call on Congress, it is bipartisan, and we will call on the President to be even stronger so that the next 30 years, and sooner rather than later, we'll see a matriculation from dictatorship to freedom and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Smith. I would now like to welcome Congressman Levin. Congressman Levin was just telling me that he was there in 1989. And Congressman Levin is a freshman here in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is serving on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And he previously served at Human Rights Watch, where he authored a number of publications on human rights issues in China. And he is leading some legislative initiatives that he will tell you about. Thank you so much, Congressman Levin.
Good afternoon. Actually, I worked for Human Rights Watch in Haiti, but I was in Hong Kong in late May of 1989 when I participated in the biggest demonstration of my life to really joyously, there was so much positive energy as people demanded democracy in China. And then I was in Chengdu in early June, before, during, and after June 4th. And we make a huge mistake 30 years later to call this situation the Tiananmen Massacre when it was a systematic national crackdown against democracy by the Chinese government. But in Chengdu, yes, sir, in Chengdu, I spoke to so many people, students, professors, unemployed young people who were upset about corruption in their government, who were sure that their moment had come when the people of China could participate in self-determination and in their own government. And then I watched, horrified, on the night of June 4th, as the Chinese authorities cracked down. There were 2 days of sort of running battles for control of the streets of the center of Chengdu. I saw too many people beaten and killed. And then I saw people taken away like so many sacks of potatoes with their hands tied behind their back, thrown onto trucks, never to be seen again. And then I was there because I was studying Tibetan. I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan in Tibetan religion and philosophy. And so I went and traveled through the Tibetan areas of Sichuan and Gansu province, areas the Chinese government doesn't even call Tibet, but there are large parts of Qinghai and Gansu and Sichuan provinces that are really Tibetan areas. The Dalai Lama himself is not from the Tibet Autonomous Region. And I went to the Labrang Monastery, and a monk there, when he found I could speak Tibetan, they pulled me into their little cell where they lived, their room. And they said they show us off, the happy monks, but we're really not free to practice our religion. We're not free to do research. We don't have half the number of monks that we used to have. And he pulled out of a crack in the wall of his room some little slogans. And he gave them to me. And today they hang in my office in the U.S. House of Representatives. He never could have imagined. He said, go tell the world our story. That the Tibetan people just wanted some self-determination. And so what are we to make today, 30 years later? It would be easy to get depressed. China, the very definition of an authoritarian state, with mass surveillance down into the everyday life of people. 1 million or more Uyghurs and Kazakhs and others languishing in forced labor camps. Tibetan culture and other cultures endangered altogether. But you know, in my Jewish tradition, one of the most famous sayings is that you don't have to complete the task, but you must work on to fight against injustice. And I would just like to ask you to think on this 30th anniversary, what would African Americans have thought in the 1870s as laws were passed in the new Jim Crow era, taking away their basic rights just a few years after the Civil War? What would South Africans think in 1962 when Nelson Mandela was taken off to prison for life? People kept struggling. It was 90 years before we passed the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act of the United States. And we have so much more to do. It was 28 years before Nelson Mandela walked out of prison, and one more year before he became president of South Africa. We don't know what the future holds for China, but we know one thing for sure. We are going to fight until our dying breath so that all the people in China and around the world can obtain their full human rights and their place as global citizens, creating a common future for all of humanity. Thank you so much for coming out, and keep on fighting.
Thank you, Congressman Levin. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the co-founder and chairman of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Dr. Lee Edwards, who is a great leader of the anti-communist movement here in our country and around the world. Dr. Edwards.
Thank you, Christina. And as we've already heard, today marks the 30th anniversary of the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre. And as we've also heard, 30 years ago, the streets of Beijing were filled with the sounds of machine guns and tanks and the cries of wounded and dying demonstrators. How many died that blood-stained June morning? Hundreds? Thousands? The Chinese communists deny the truth until this day, but the truth cannot be suppressed. Brave, determined human rights activists refuse to be silenced. They continue to call for a free and democratic China. The day is coming. The day is coming, and sooner than the Chinese communists realize, when communism will collapse and the most populous nation in the world will turn toward democracy. The day is coming, and sooner than the Chinese communists realize, when China will be free. So, let us do our part. Let us declare here and now that we will never, never, never forget the ultimate sacrifice of those who died on June 4th, 1989. Let our motto be, Ziyu Zhongguo, Ziyu Zhongguo. And now it is my great honor to introduce to you 4 survivors of Tiananmen Square, here to make remarks and to mark with us the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square massacre. Wei Jingxing, Wang Dan, Dr. John Li Yang, and Chen Guangcheng.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, it's my privilege to introduce Speaker Nancy Polosi. Speaker Polosi is a champion for democracy for people all around the world. In 1991, she visited Tiananmen Square and unveiled a banner in memory of those who died for democracy. In their recent letter, the Mothers of Tiananmen mentioned Speaker Polosi, and we appreciate her taking time to make a statement for democracy, for human rights, by being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Speaker Polosi.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great honor to be here with each and every one of you. An honor for all of us to be with our heroes of Tiananmen Square. So many who are gathered here, Wang Dan and others. Thank you. Wei Jingcheng, Chan, so many heroes. And so it was that Marion Smith, thank you, and thank you to the victims of communism. Thank you to Tiananmen Square moms who are present with their words and present in spirit to remember the tragic chapter of the past. Today we remember the horror of the massacre in Tiananmen Square and the heroism of the Tiananmen Square protesters. We must remember because China still tries to deny these heroes their history. As the writer Liu Chun wrote, lies written in ink cannot disguise facts written in blood. 2 years after the massacre, Democrats and Republicans, a group of us, went to China on a human rights visit, and we unfurled a black and white banner reading in Tiananmen Square, to those who died for democracy. We were chased by police and the PLO and all, the PLA and the rest. There we are. There we are. The PLA then was coming down the steps to come after us there. We had to run. It was a question of who could run the fastest. But in any event, we must realize that what the Chinese did that day is a challenge to the conscience of the world. We cannot ignore that challenge. We must face it, and we must face what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs in China today. Any folks here from the Uyghur community, we are with you in that respect. Thank you. Where Kaoshi, I met him when he was 21 years old. That was 30 years ago. Well, I'm not going to do the math on that. He was one of the first dissidents to come to the United States to testify before a committee organized by Congressman Tom Lantos. It was an historic day for the Congress to welcome this brave, courageous leader of pro-democratic reform to the Congress of the United States. Little did we know that 30 years later we would still be having to make this fight. So in any event, we talked about the Uyghurs already, and then the protesters in Hong Kong seeking their freedoms. And aren't we proud of their courageous outpouring yesterday yesterday for us, today for us, but yesterday for them, their outpouring of support for the democracy protesters. The Tibetan people whose religion, culture, and language is under threat by the Chinese government. And the journalists, human rights activists, lawyers, Christians, and democracy activists persecuted without justice. It's very brave of those people in Hong Kong today because, as you know, the Chinese want to put a law in the books that would extradite any of the people that whose actions they're not happy with. And that jeopardizes tens of thousands of Americans who are in Hong Kong as well. In honor of all those who died for democracy in Tiananmen Square and around the world, we pledge to preserve their memory and to continue their fight. I'm so proud to have heard the words of my colleague Congressman Levin of Michigan, who was in Tiananmen Square, who took his own photographs and has his own memories of what happened there. And so it is with great pride that we have a renewed spirit in the Congress as we observe the 30th anniversary. As a tribute to the courage, we are humbled to dedicate a statue here today. I see prisoner of conscience Wang Jingzhao. You know, one of the things the Chinese government likes to say, and I hope they can hear me from here, Chinese government, you may be in the crowd, you may be down the street, but I want you to hear what I have to say. You can tell the prisoners all you want that we don't remember them or know why they are imprisoned, but we do. And every chance we get, we want to mention their names on the floor of the Congress, outside the Capitol, and on any of our messages to the Chinese government. We believe there should be a great future between the United States and China. We believe that the Chinese people have a craving for democratic reform that is up to them to decide, and they should not be mowed over in a tank because they speak out for their own beliefs about freedom of expression. I want to join my colleague, Congressman from New Jersey, Chris Smith, who said we're either for the man before the tank or we're for the man who ordered the tanks on the kids. We're for the man before the tank. I think we can all agree on that. So thank you. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for honoring. Thank you for being here to enable us all to speak in a strong voice that we will remember, we will not forget, we will always be in awe of those who had the courage to speak for freedom. And now I guess we're going to have a sermon. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be with you.
You look beautiful.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the Tank Man statue is being unveiled by the Speaker and by Dr. John Lee. And if we can possibly get the sculptor, where is the sculptor? Thomas Marsh. And I know the Speaker knows Thomas. They're old buddies. Thomas, come on, come on. Come ahead, come ahead. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Shay. Which one do you want to do? Ladies and gentlemen, if you please help me in welcoming Dr. John Lee. John Lee, you're up. a survivor of Tiananmen Square.
Okay. Distinguished guests, my dear friends of human rights, dear brothers and sisters, we gather here to remember our fallen brothers and sisters in Tiananmen Square and celebrate their courage and sacrifice. We come here after 30 years to reaffirm that no matter how many days or decades have gone by, there will never be a time when we forget the heroes we have lost and their mission that remains undone. On this important occasion, we are issuing a statement, Washington Declaration on the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Massacre. Time will not allow me to read the whole text. I only read one paragraph, drafted by Mr. Wang Kang. Finally, we want to hold ourselves to the following pledge. 30 years ago, inspired by patriotism and idealism, deciding that we would rather disappoint our parents than not live up to our social responsibility, we dedicate our youth, innocent blood, and tears to the 1989 democracy movement. All the prices we have paid for freedom, independence, and democracy shall not be in vain. All the setbacks, sufferings, and the loss of lives that will impose them upon us shall not be wasted. The sense of responsibility, morality, and courage, the spirit of freedom, and the idea of a democracy demonstrated by the 1989 protesters blazed a rough but hopeful trail to freedom for the Chinese people who have been oppressed, exploited, and persecuted. Today, with deep conviction, we pledge to the heavens and the earth that as long as the tyranny and the totalitarian rule by the Chinese Communist Party are not over, we will persist in our endeavor and sacrifice without regret. We are willing to work tirelessly to end the tribulations of our people until the day when the sun of freedom rises over China. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to introduce to you another survivor of Tiananmen Square massacre, who has been leading the fight for freedom and democracy in an extraordinary way for so many years. Wei Jingxing.
Thank you very much, old friend. We're glad you're here.
30年前的今天，成千上万的中国人，遭到政治的屠杀，因为他们要求民主自由，反对官场腐败，并且坚持要求当局给人民一个说法。
3 decades ago today, thousands of Chinese were slaughtered for they wanted democracy and freedoms. They wanted the government to do something about the corruption of the officials.
他们遭到了以邓小平为首的共产党 和军队的残酷的镇压。这场残酷的镇压给了中国人民一个清楚的教训，证明了共产党是人民的敌人，不和你讲理的那种敌人。
They were mercilessly cracked down by the government led by Deng Xiaoping, and this crackdown had to give the people a clear lesson. That is, the Communist Party is the enemy of the people. It's an enemy that you could not reason with.
这场残酷的屠杀牺牲了成千上万中国的英雄，也警告了共产党阵营的其他国家的领导人，同时还激励了苏联和东欧各国人民的斗志。很快就导致了苏联和东欧共产党政权的崩溃，改变了世界的政治格局，形成了一波民主化的浪潮。
This bloodthirsty massacre had taken lives of thousands of Chinese heroes, and it also alerted the leadership of both of the communist community. But still, it also motivated the people of the former Soviet Union and East Europe to fight further, to carry on the fight. And actually, it soon caused the collapse of the former Soviet Union and the other communist countries in East Europe. It changed the entire world, and it formed a wave for democracy.
遗憾的是，以美国为首的西方民主国家没有给予中国人民有力的帮助，也没有给予邓小平集团有效的压力。在邓小平集团犹豫不决的关键时刻，释放了一些错误的信号，等于为共产党的大屠杀开了绿灯，并且在大屠杀后不久，就用经济上的开放帮助共产党稳定了统治，以致给这一波民主浪潮画上了休止符。
Regrettably, the Western democracies led by the United States did not lend its affirmative help to the Chinese people. It did not apply strong pressure to the gun of Deng Xiaoping. And while the gun was hesitating at the critical moments, while they were hesitating, the foreign democracies actually released some wrong signals, which in effect condoned the massacre of the Communist Party. Also, soon after the massacre, their economic policies actually stabilized the communist regime and ended this wave of democracy.
这种对共产主义暴行的绥靖政策，给美国人民和全世界都带来了危险。越来越多的美国人民终于忍无可忍，在美国政府的领导下，开始了纠正错误的行动。这对共产党造成致命的威胁，同时开启了一波新的民主化的浪潮。
This policy of appeasement to the communist violence and dictatorship actually endangered the people of the United States and the world. Many Americans are getting impatient on this. Under the leadership of the United States, they are starting to correct the mistakes they made, which had put the communist regime in an inevitable situation, and it also actually started a new wave for democracy.
中国共产党的垮台或者和平演变，将会导致一系列共产党政权和专制政权的垮台，将为全人类带来新的格局和更多的幸福。我们中国人要继承64先烈们的牺牲精神，再一次走在民主自由浪潮的前列，为人类1/4和更多的人争取光明的前途。
The eventual collapse of the Communist Party or a peaceful transition of power will cause a collapse of other communist regimes and dictatorships. It will also bring a new world for the entire human being and bring in more happiness to all of us. we Chinese will carry on the dedication of the June 4th heroes. We will be at the forefront of the new wave for democracy and freedoms. We will fight for a brighter future for over a quarter of world population and more. Thank you.
谢谢大家，谢谢大家对中国人民的关注和鼓励。等一会儿这个活动结束了，2点半以后，我们在国会Ribbon Building 里边还有一个活动，欢迎大家过去参加。
Thank you all very much. Thank you for your attention to the democracy and the freedoms of Chinese people. After this event is over, we also have an event at the Ribbon Office building of the Congress, and you are all welcome and invited to come. Thank you.
谢谢大家。从这边下来。
And now, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker was not only there in Tiananmen Square, but was a leader of the democracy movement in Tiananmen Square. It is now my great honor and privilege to introduce to you Dan Wang.
Thank you for coming. Today, we commemorate the 30th anniversary of June 4th. By so doing, we remind the world we must not forget that today's Chinese Communist Party has not corrected its tyranny mentality of 30 years ago and still insists on resisting democracy globally. Today, we commemorate 30th anniversary of June 4th, also to express to all democracy-loving forces, especially the democratic force of Hong Kong and Taiwan, that we must unify in order to resist the anti-democratic force that are expanding across the globe. Thus, we commemorate the 30th anniversary of June 4th for those who died in the past, also for the tomorrow of those of us who survived. I also represent a group of 1989 students, and we want to say to our brothers and sisters who are already in heaven, we want to say, dear brothers and sisters, as survivors, as long as there's breath left in us, we will never forget you. We will never give up. We will unite again and set off again. We will continue your ideals and fight for a brighter future of China. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have still one more person who was there in Tiananmen Square who will be speaking with us this afternoon. And how privileged we are that these brave, no longer young men survived and are with us this afternoon to remind us again and again not to forget June 4th, 1989. It is now my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Chen Guangchang.
各位朋友好，怎么说呢？今天有这个机会在这儿跟大家交流啊，我觉得怎么说呢，也谈不上，30年来这种内心的这种郁闷、愤怒，不由自主的都涌出来。不过刚才呢，我听朋友们介绍的时候啊，说我当时在天安门，这点我可能要纠正一下，我当时是在山东，在电视机前观看天安门的事情。
After being here after 30 years, there are a lot of strong feelings that are coming up. The anger, the frustration, the sadness. But I do want to also correct what was said in the introduction. I myself was not there in Tiananmen in 1989. But I did watch from my home in Shandong province on the television.
那个时候我知道中国的生活在最偏僻的农村的很多百姓都在关注着北京天安门发生的一系列的事情。实际上他们对于中共最后发生的屠杀也是恨之入骨，但是苦于无奈啊。实际上到现在中国普通百姓在茶余饭后也不断的用6四来谈及说中共所犯下的错误啊，以此来表达这个社会已经堕落了。虽然当年89民运的要求是正确的，但是最后还是被暴力给镇压下去，是非常无奈的一件事情。
And I know that at the time, the Chinese people were watching as well. They're watching what was happening in Tiananmen Square, and they were filled with anger and sadness as well, but they had nowhere to go with that anger and sadness. And ever since that time, the Chinese people have used Tiananmen as a way of talking about their disappointment and anger about the regime, and how the regime and the country have sunk.
那么实际上我们看到的解密文件来看呢，中共一直对中国人说从来没有这个死人，但实际上我们看到美国解密的文件是有10454人被杀，受伤者多达这个伤残者多达28796人。
And since secret files have come out that were held by the American government, it's been revealed that despite the fact that the communist regime says that no one died at Tiananmen, more than 10,000, roughly 10,425 people were killed, and over 28,000 people were injured in that incident.
实际上当时我在监狱的时候，有一个青岛的学生领袖曾经告诉我，中共那场大屠杀实际是有预谋的，他在全国各地除了省会城市以外，包括2线、3线城市都部署了荷枪实弹的这个军队，就等着大家上街进行屠杀。中共这次向全国人民的宣战已经30年了，我觉得我们需要思考的、需要反思的很多。
And when I was in prison, I spoke with somebody who had been a leader in the student movement, and he said that the military operation had been planned for quite a while by the government, by the regime, and that it was nationwide in its scope. It wasn't something that just happened overnight in Beijing alone. And ever since then, the Chinese regime has thought of it, the people of China has declared war on the people of China. So we really need to think about this incident and consider what it means today.
89年之后，中共把当时屠杀这个平民和学生的那些退伍的军人都安插到了这个党政机关里边。那么这些30年来，中共一直还在利用他们对中国人民进行打击和破坏。那么建立了这种庞大的维稳系统、国保系统、武警系统。
And after the Tiananmen incident, the regime took the soldiers who'd been involved in killing the protesters and set them up in different bureaus of the government. And since then, the Chinese regime has expanded its system of control over the population with the Stability Maintenance Agency.
那么当时89年之前，西方民主国家没有及时的做出正确的反应，导致中共对中国人民大开杀戒。那么我想30年后的今天，我们必须避免再重新犯这样的错误。那么中共这样一个中国人民乃至世界人民的全民公敌，我们必须要设法结束他的共产专制，必须把它送进历史的灰烬，这是我们需要反思和思考的。中共这样一个杀人的恶魔政权，对于6四这个罪责，我们必须对他进行惩罚， 必须要求他为此付出应有的代价。
Before 1989, the West didn't take it into consideration that the Chinese regime could actually open fire on its own people. Now today, the West is still not prepared for a similar kind of situation. We need to be looking at this very seriously. We need to consider that the Chinese regime is not only the enemy of the Chinese people, but enemy of the entire world. We need to think about how we can make the Chinese regime go into the ash pit of history.
Thank you. 我们从中共每年出动武警近200万次这个数字来看，中国人民对于中共的反抗从来没有停止，而且越来越强烈。那所以呢，我想，我们应该和中国人民站在一起，我们应该用我们的各种各样的渠道来推动西方民主国家制定出符合中国人民利益的政策，而不仅仅是和中共政权为伍来获取一些眼前的利益。
And from the over 200,000 of protests that are happening in China every year, we can see that the Chinese people have never given up their fighting back against the Chinese regime. So we need to, now in the West, we need to think of ways that we can help the Chinese people to realize their quest for democracy and not always be helping the Chinese regime.
谢谢大家，谢谢。30年过去了啊，这个中共死不改悔，毫无悔改之意，而且最近这个魏凤和竟然说当年的这个屠杀是对的，这说明他与全世界人民为敌的这个决心是一定不死不休啊！对于中共这样一个邪恶政权，我们必须对他采取最果断的措施。目前从法律上来讲，美国有非常有效的 Magnitsky 法案可以用，对中共这个共产专制政权的干部进行惩罚。另外，我觉得美国也应该果断的考虑采取实际行动，除了我们在这儿举办活动之外，采取一些具体的，比如说支持台湾，比如说支持给中国人民直接提供实际的、有力的、有效的一些帮助，包括技术上的，包括物质上的，包括实体上的，来协助中国结束共产专制，走向民主，让中国人民结束共产专制的苦难。
The Chinese regime has never expressed any regret or remorse for what happened, and they'll, in fact, do whatever they want to continue their repression. In the West, we need to think of how we can fight back. The American government has an excellent mechanism with the Magnitsky Act, Global Magnitsky Act, by which we can sanction them, and we need to use all these mechanisms to control them and limit them.
谢谢大家。
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chen, and to our leaders, our Chinese leaders for democracy and human rights who have been with us here this morning, who were there in Tiananmen Square in 1989. Thank you for your courage and for your leadership. I now have the great pleasure of welcoming Congressman McGovern. Congressman McGovern is the chairman of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. He is a great champion for human rights. He also co-chairs the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and he is a great friend of all ethnic and religious minorities. Thank you so much for being with us, Congressman.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you to the many organizations and human rights advocates for organizing this rally this afternoon. It is so important, and it is great to see the entire community of advocates and dissidents come together to send a unified message to China and to the world. There are many here today whose lives were profoundly changed by the events in China 30 years ago. We welcome you especially. We honor your courage then and in the years since to keep fighting for human rights and democratic reform in China. You will be pleased to know that I was just on the House floor where we had a great debate on a resolution that will be voted on later today to remember the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre and to call on the Chinese government to respect human rights. I expect we'll have an overwhelming vote when we vote later this afternoon. And if we do, and I trust we will, that vote shows that the American people stand on the side of those seeking truth about Tiananmen Square. 30 years this week, an estimated 1 million Chinese students, workers, and citizens joined the peaceful protests in Tiananmen Square and in over 400 cities throughout China. We remember with sadness and outrage the crackdown that followed as the so-called People's Liberation Army was unleashed on its own people. On this 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, let me be clear. We stand with the students, the workers, and the citizens who so bravely called for change in China in 1989. We stand with the Tiananmen mothers in their simple request to mourn their children publicly and have a full accounting of the victims. We stand with thousands of political and religious prisoners of conscience who are detained or imprisoned for exercising the very human rights guaranteed by China's constitution and international law. And we stand with the Uyghur people and the Turkic Muslims who are enduring a slow-motion Tiananmen and may be victims of crimes against humanity. We stand with the people of Tibet, whose cultural and religious practices are so tightly controlled that over 150 Tibetans have taken the unimaginable step of setting themselves on fire to draw attention to the repression there. And we stand with the people of Hong Kong, who are pushing back to preserve their autonomy, even as a new proposed extradition law could endanger the lives of so many who are critical of the Chinese government's policies. So we stand with the students, the workers, the environmentalists, the lawyers, the citizen journalists, and bloggers, the women's movement, the migrants, the families, the artists, the LGBTQ community, and indeed all the people of China. We know the spirit of Tiananmen is still alive and well. And we know because China's leaders demonstrate their fear of it every day with their security cameras, their censorship, detention centers, and obsession with preventing the people of China from learning the truth. If the survivors of Tiananmen Square think they were somehow defeated, just look at the impact the very idea of remembering those events has had on the Chinese government. Think of the time and the energy and resources the Chinese government is expending on denial even now, 30 years after the fact. That's power, the power of ideas, the power of people coming together, the power of people remembering the truth. And no censorship, no tanks, no guns can stand against the firepower of the memory, the idea, the reality of Tiananmen Square. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Congressman McGovern. We will now hear from leaders in the cause for the people of Tibet. And I'd like to start by introducing my friend Matteo Mecacci, who is the president of the International Campaign for Tibet. Matteo.
Thank you all. And it's great to follow after Jim McGovern, who's such a leader who has championed human rights in the US Congress for many, many years, and in particular also on Tibet. He achieved a major milestone last year with the approval of the reciprocal access to Tibet. So thank you very much, Mr. McGovern, and to all the members of Congress who have come here. It was 30 years ago when brave and patriotic Chinese students rose to challenge a dictatorship, and then they were crushed. It was 60 years ago when the Tibetan people rose in Lhasa to protect His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and when he was forced into exile, they were crushed. It is today that over 1 million Uyghurs are kept in re-education camps in a policy which is so extreme that has been tested before in Tibet and is now planned to be applied in other places in China and well beyond China's border. All this repression does not represent the strength of the Chinese government. It represents its weakness because it means that they have not yet won the trust of the people they govern. Our society, our governments have allowed the Chinese government to do that, to get away with that. We have lived under a great illusion that capitalism, that free market would bring democracy and freedom to China. No. While economic progress is important to any society, including China, it cannot come at the expense of freedom. We have seen this in the past. and it has always been with tragedies. By enabling the growth of an authoritarian China, we are now faced with the consequences of the expansion and influence of this model well beyond its borders. By providing political legitimacy to a closed society, we do not encourage them to reform. To the contrary, we encourage them not to reform. Reciprocity means that as China grows on the world stage, it has become mandatory that it aligns with international standards on trade, on economic issues. But it is also very important that China opens up to the world. Freedom of movement, freedom of information, freedom of the press, academic freedom are as important as trade and economic issues. And these principles must be respected and must be demanded. The US Congress has shown some great leadership on these issues over these years by passing very important legislation. It has been mentioned, the Global Magnitsky Act, which calls for accountability for those responsible for human rights violations. The Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act passed last year. There are other pieces of legislation, from the Human Rights Uyghur Act to the Hong Kong Freedom Act. This needs to be passed, but the message from here in front of the Congress is also to the administration, is to the State Department, is to the White House. Implement this legislation now. It is already too late for those who have died and who have sacrificed. Let's make sure that we stop repression before it's too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you, Matteo. We will now hear from another leader of the Tibet movement, Tenzin Dorji, who is the senior researcher and strategist at the Tibet Action Institute and the former executive director of Students for a Free Tibet. Tenzin.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's a great honor to be here and hear from so many of the Chinese democracy leaders from the 1989 democracy movement. And I always feel these are the people who should be the leaders of China today, who should have become the leaders of the Chinese government. And right now, we witness a great irony in history, where the CCP, the so-called Chinese Communist Party, has turned into a fascist totalitarian regime. If we stop for a moment to think about it, there are some really alarming parallels that emerge between the Nazi Germany of 1930s and Xi Jinping's China of today.
That's right, that's right.
China has its own concentration camps where millions of Uyghurs have been locked up. It has its secret police. China has its cyber police for thought control. The penetration of the police force all over China, over Tibet, in Xinjiang, the goal is not crime control, the goal is mind control. China has the Great Firewall. And you know, it's not visible from space like the Great Wall, but it touches every aspect of the average person's life. It's the greatest, it's the highest and the most sinister wall ever built by mankind, with a goal of keeping a quarter of humanity in the dark ages of information. And when you think about these parallels, we begin to see that the Chinese government has become not only the greatest threat to human rights, and not just the greatest threat to the liberal international world order that we live in. The Chinese government has become the greatest threat to humanity as such. And a lot of my friends ask me this question, right? You have China, one of the most powerful countries in the world, and then on the other side you have unarmed Chinese citizens. You have unarmed Tibetan people. You have unarmed Uyghur people. How come the Chinese government feels the need to use so much force, to use brute force to control these peoples? And I think the answer is simple. The answer is that the Chinese government knows it has no legitimacy. And when you don't have legitimacy, that's when you need to use brute force. And we see this in history repeated again and again. You know, one lesson that all the empires and regimes in history know is once you take power, you try to make a transition from the use of brute force toward building a foundation of legitimacy. Because without legitimacy, no empire can last, no regime can last. And after 70 years of being in power, the Chinese government has no legitimacy. If you want to talk about democratic legitimacy, Xi Jinping has no democratic legitimacy. Of course, I heard that he won 100% of the votes. But that doesn't make him democratic any more than Kim Jong-un, who won 99.9%. They have no revolutionary legitimacy. You know, the kind of legitimacy that comes from winning a communist revolution. Xi Jinping is not a revolutionary. He was not a participant in any revolution. The Chinese Communist Party is not even communist. The only kind of legitimacy, you know, the last remaining leg of legitimacy that the government tries to stand on for the last 30 years is performance-based legitimacy that comes from producing economic growth. And that final leg of legitimacy is beginning to shake in China. And that is the pillar of legitimacy that we have to strike, that we have to target. And we have to target this pillar with all the resources we have, all the tools that we have, all the political, social, economic, diplomatic instruments that we can mobilize in order to attack this particular legitimacy, which is already shaking. So let's face it, as long as the Chinese Communist Party survives, there will be no democracy in China. There will be no freedom in Tibet or Xinjiang or Hong Kong. And today, after 30 years since the Tiananmen massacre, I think it's a good time to imagine a future, to imagine an alternative future where China is truly free, to imagine a future where Tibet is free and independent, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama returns to a free and independent Tibet. It's a good time to imagine a future where the Uyghur people are free and have control over their own Uyghur homeland, known as East Turkestan. Not just released from these concentration camps because China can put them back tomorrow, but truly in charge of their own fate. A future where Mongolians are free. A future where Hong Kong is free and democratic and self-governing. Where Taiwan is secure. A future where the South China Sea is not on the brink of war every single day. So let's all imagine and work toward this vision of a future where China is free and the Chinese Communist Party is history. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Tenzin. We will now hear from Sharstong Dayton with the Central Tibetan Administration, who has traveled all the way from Dharamsala to be here with us today. Please welcome Sharstong.
尊敬的各位嘉宾、女士们、先生们，30年前的今天，在中国首都北京发生了震惊世界的8·9·64大屠杀事件。那是中国当代史上堪称最为冲动的一次血腥事件。中国人民心目中最神圣的天安门广场成了屠杀无辜学生的杀人屠城。中国当局悍然动用坦克、机枪对和平请愿、要求自治、民主、反对腐败的学生与市民进行暴力镇压，一手制造了惨绝人寰的8·9·64惨案。全世界每一个尊重生命、维护正义、珍爱自由的人都永远不会忘记这一天。 相信六四精神永垂史册。作为一名长期流亡在外的藏人，对89六四更有感触，深有体会。这里首先我要感谢光明力量等组织的邀请，今天在美国首都华盛顿有机会参加纪念89六四30周年这个具有历史意义的盛会，使我感到非常荣幸。30年来，在海外89六四学运的领导者和亲身参与者，以及许多从事民主运动的优秀人士，你们为中国的民主事业做出了极大贡献。你们为了14亿中国人民的自由，为了实现六四英雷们的遗愿，在全球各地掀起了一次又一次波澜壮阔的民主运动，同时在为中国历史增添辉煌的篇章。尽管这30年一路走来，面对集权专制中国在国际上的种种压力，前进途中充满荆棘和坎坷，但是民用各路军纪，破荆斩棘，继往开来，自始至终坚持民主理念，不断发扬光大六四精神，为中国的民主化开辟了康庄大道。毋庸置疑，这是中国通向一条光明的正确途径。相对看看日薄西山、江河日下的中共，其内部权斗不断，外交陷入恐惧，官场腐败难治，官民冲突加剧，社会道德沦丧，人心跌宕陷呕，民心向被决定国运的兴衰成败。得民心者得天下，失民心者失天下，这是比事实反复证明了的历史法则。一个得不到民心，只靠赤裸裸的警察统治，或者靠武力镇压维护自身利益，这样的政权是无法长久的。尤其是当今人人向往民主自由的现代社会，更没有它的生存空间。无论如何，我们认为89六四是中国民主化的种子，虽然它的生根发芽有些缓慢，但坚信它一定会得到丰收的结果。今天借此机会，我代表藏人行政中央外交部向诸位深表谢意。30年来，89民用各路军纪坚定不移地支持和尊重西藏精神领袖达赖喇嘛，关注和支持西藏问题和中间道路政策，并为流亡藏人建言献策，促进藏海民族间的交流交融，从全球各地专门传播西藏问题，使西藏问题推向更高境界。尤其是中国当局试图把政治矛盾转换为民族矛盾之际，海外各路民用人士已成为西藏与国内广大华人间传送西藏问题真相无法替代的坚实桥梁。同时，藏汉民族间出现了划时代的友好局面。早在上世纪80年代末开始，达赖喇嘛总裁对中国民用人士情有独钟，中国民用人士始终成为他老人家的座上宾。当然，解决西藏问题离开不了华人，推动中国民主化也需要藏人的协助。藏汉等民族承受着同样的苦难，承担着共同的命运。中国实现民主化和西藏问题的解决，是藏汉两个民族的共同责任，责无旁贷。愿我们藏汉民族紧密合作，以实际行动来推动中国民主化进程，共同为六四永恒祈祷。愿六四英灵早日安息，让藏汉维蒙等民族携手共进，不断推动中国的人权、自由、民主事业，早日实现中国民主化，让各民族获得真正自由。谢谢 ，Thank you very much。
Thank you, Sharstong. It is now my pleasure to introduce Rashan Abbas. She is the founder of the Campaign for Uyghurs, and she is another tremendously effective advocate for human rights. I actually first met Rashan Abbas in Geneva. It was in November for China's Universal Periodic Review, and we were at a rally in front of the United Nations, and Rashan held up a sign saying, "Where is my sister? She is a doctor. She does not need vocational training." And it was such a powerful exposure of the blatant lie of the CCP that the concentration camps, where they're currently holding 1 to 3 million Uyghur people, are vocational training centers. Please welcome Rashan.
Greetings to all. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak about this horrendous atrocity that the Uyghur people are facing under this communist regime. And thank you for the organizers and co-sponsors. It has been 30 long years since we have witnessed the state of terror when Communist China massacred its own unarmed young students in order to maintain its brutal authority. Yet, 30 years after, in China, communist ideals are alive and well. This totalitarian ideology has returned to the world in full force, and it's backed up by the China's enormous economic power. My people, the Uyghurs, are an ethnically and culturally Turkic people which has been under the control of Communist China since 1949. As a result of our ethnic identity, unique culture, language, and religion, we have been persecuted and repressed for decades. Now, the Communist Chinese government is conducting a genocide against the Uyghurs with mass surveillance, modern-day concentration camps, repression and the evilness, challenging human dignity and the basic survival rights that God gave us with our birth. Now the entire population of East Turkestan, including my sister, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, has become the victims of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, the blueprint for his imperialistic dream for the world domination. Between the trade threats, the Belt and Road Initiative's power, debt trap diplomacy, and the manipulation of the UN, China has become a power able to strong-arm the world. The individual freedom to choose what we believe, how we believe, and why we believe is one of the major achievements of the modern world. It defines our sense of liberty, of the freedom of conscience that we all take for granted. Yet, now this foundation of our freedom is coming under attack. This disturbing trend is clearly visible in the persecution of the Uyghurs. This issue, the persecution of the Uyghurs, is only one part of the rising tide of intolerance that is rapidly covering the world. The struggle should be the concern of everyone who values the basic human dignity, respect, and the freedom of belief for all people. We must hold the world leaders accountable and demand that raise this issue with the Chinese government. To make things change with the communist regime, we must all raise our voices. China is the biggest communist threat in the world today, and it endangers the world's stability, Western values, and the democracy for all humans. It's on us, with our actions, to put an end to this despicable malice practice on our watch. Our silence and inactivity will undermine what we value in this great country. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashawn. Just a quick announcement before I invite up the next speaker. We are very behind schedule. We've had so many great speakers here with us today, members of Congress who we didn't expect to come. It's a great problem to have. And having said that, we have 15 minutes left and about 12 speakers left to speak. So I just would like to ask all speakers, please keep your remarks brief to a minute. And our next speaker here with us today is Dr. Bob Fu. He is the founder and president of China Aid, and he is one of the leading voices in the world for persecuted faith communities, especially the Christian church in China. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Christina, for organizing this historic, important rally. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the Chinese Communist Party in the past 70 years has adopted two very important tactics. Try to erase the memory of the history of its oppression and try to divide those who are oppressed, the faith communities, among the Christians, among the Uyghurs, Muslims, among the Tibetans. But today, I want to really share this encouraging message that your presence, our presence today here is the testimony to tell the Communist Party of China that they can never be successful in dividing us, in making us to forget what's the past. So I want to read one verse from the scripture in Psalm 10:17 to encourage us that those who are persecuted, those who are afflicted by the oppressors, your voice will never be forgotten. Your fight will never be isolated. We are with you. So you, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them, and you listen to their cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror. 耶和华谦卑人的心愿，你早已知道，你必预备他们的心，也必侧耳听他们的祈求。为要给孤儿和受欺压的人伸冤，使强横的人不再威吓他们。So let's work together, unite in the united voice to speak no to those oppressing, no matter which faith communities. And let's work together, joining hands, to work for freedom and freedom for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much to my friend Bob. I'd now like to welcome Marco Respinti, the director in charge of Bitter Winter, a publication that has done excellent work in documenting the persecution of religious communities. Marco.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is for me a real honor to address you in this important event commemorating a fatal circumstance. The brutalizing communist government of China is still there, ruling harshly on millions and millions of people, denying many liberties, treading on human rights, persecuting religious faith. The CCP doesn't discuss theology, doesn't even care about it. The regime persecutes all religions alike. We at Bitter Winter chronicle this vast injustice every day, online in 8 languages. In fact, there is a strong connection between the persecution that the CCP wages against religions and the massacre in Tiananmen Square. Just after Tiananmen, the CCP dispatched its best scholars to Eastern Europe to understand how all the crumbling of the Eastern Communist regime was possible. They concluded that religion had been the most critical single factor in mobilizing the masses against the communist parties in several Eastern European countries. So the idea that this idea became mandatory reading for all the cadres of the Central CCP school. The new generation of the CCP leaders grew up being taught that the communist system in Eastern Europe had collapsed, mostly because of religion, and that the control and repression of religion was mandatory for China to avoid following the same fate. Mr. Xi Jinping, the present General Secretary of the CCP and the President of the People's Republic of China, is one of them. In fact, repression of religion in China is actually getting worse under him. The new regulation on religious affairs that came into force on February 1st, 2018 is the most restrictive indicates. Xi Jinping is fully persuaded that Tiananmen's lesson is that religion may destroy communism, if not kept under control. This country has been founded on the opposite premise. It is enshrined in the First Amendment. So let me paraphrase the First Amendment here today. Red China shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Remember Tiananmen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mako. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Katrina Lantos-Sweat. She is the president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and a member of the Foundation's Advisory Council, and someone who I look up to. So thank you so much for being here, Katrina.
Good afternoon, my friends. It's been a long program with a lot of speakers, so I'm going to be very brief. In some senses, my real claim to fame here today is that I'm the daughter of Congressman Tom Lantos. Some of you remember him as one of the most passionate and indefatigable fighters for freedom and democracy and human rights in China and everywhere in the world. My father was the only Holocaust survivor ever elected to serve in the United States Congress, and he was the only member of Congress who had personally experienced what it meant to live under brutal fascism of the right under the Nazis and brutal fascism of the left under the communists. And he understood better than perhaps any person in the United States government that America can be a great power, but it cannot be a great nation unless it stands for its most fundamental values. And America, when it comes to China, has not stood for our most fundamental values. I am sick and tired of American political leaders of the right and the left giving a pass to China when it comes to their outrageous, brutal repression of all of the communities we've heard about today. It is not right. It does not represent who we are as a nation, and we must demand no more free pass for China. No more free pass for China. They must be held accountable, and it is up to us to do it. Now, there is a good news story. We have been disappointed by political leaders of the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats, but you also saw here today Republican and Democratic leaders, conservatives and progressives, coming together to lend their voice to this cause. Human rights is the one uniting principle that even in a very divided time can bring us together, and we must lead and play from that strength. I want to urge each of you, I want to leave you with a practical homework assignment. Anybody here interested in a homework assignment? Please raise your hand if you're ready for a homework assignment. We've heard talk about the Global Magnitsky Act. It's incredibly important. There is another practical policy tool that we have within reach, but we need your help to push it over the top. And that is, we must pressure our government, our State Department, the BBG, our Congress, to insist that the United States dedicates sufficient funds to tear down the Great Firewall of China. The technologies, the skills, and the apps are out there to do this. but we do not have the funding from our government. So let us make it our goal to flood the Congress, flood the administration, and flood the newspapers with the message that America has it in its power to tear down the Great Firewall of China, just as the Berlin Wall came down when Ronald Reagan stood in front of it and said, tear down this wall. We need to say, tear down that wall. And that will be an incredible tool to bring about freedom and reform in China. I'm going to close with a beautiful quote from the pastor of the Early Rain Church, Pastor Wang Yi, who currently languishes in prison, because it gives me hope, and I hope it gives you hope too. He said, in this war for freedom, in Xinjiang, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Chengdu, the rulers have chosen an enemy that can never be imprisoned, the soul of man. Therefore, they are doomed to lose this war. I agree with Pastor Wang Yi. There can be no question about the ultimate triumph of freedom and human rights in China. But a question remains. What side will we be on? Let us, each of us, commit to worthily engage in this great struggle for freedom. Let us not seek the safety of the sidelines. And let us not doubt that the outcome of this struggle will be victory for freedom, for democracy, for human rights, and for the people of China. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for your work and for continuing the incredible legacy of your father, the late Congressman Tom Lantos. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Sophie Richardson, who is the China Director for Human Rights Watch, an organization that's done incredible work in documenting human rights abuses in China and around the world. And I particularly commend to you the most recent report, China's Algorithms of Oppression, which documents what's going on in Xinjiang. So, Sophie, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. What an incredibly beautiful day. And I'm going to take this opportunity to be a little bit optimistic. Xi Jinping likes to talk all the time about his China dream. I would like to talk this afternoon about Human Rights Watch's China dream. What does that look like? It means an end to single-party rule and instead respect for political participation for everyone. It means an end to torture, arbitrary detention, and harassment of peaceful critics, and instead respect for peaceful expression. It would mean an end to the appalling abuses of Uyghurs, of Tibetans, of Christians, of Falun Gong practitioners, of people in Hong Kong, and all other vulnerable groups. It would mean an end to the restrictions on movement. For anyone who wants to go back, you may go back. For anyone who wants to leave, you may leave. Last but not least, it would mean an end to the persecution of all Tiananmen survivors and their family members, and full accountability for all of those involved in the massacre. That is our China dream, and we will not stop before justice, democracy, respect for expression, true democracy, and true expression are realized across China for all. Thank you.
I'm so impressed that you actually kept it to a minute, Sophie. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome Annie Boyajian, who is the Director of Advocacy for Freedom House, the first human rights organization in America. Thank you so much, Annie.
I'll see if I can keep Sophie's good trend going. It's an honor to be here representing Freedom House today as we're all gathering in remembrance on this important occasion. One of the first events I actually remember as a child was the student movement of 1989 and crowding with my family behind our fuzzy TV set, moving the bunny ears, trying to see what was happening. It was exciting, it was inspiring, it was so hopeful. Within days, that hope turned to horror, and even though I was thousands of miles away, it is something I will never forget. It's important that we don't forget, and that is why, of course, we're all here today. The Chinese government can't erase the truth. Even today, the struggle for greater freedom and better governance continues in China by people from all walks of life. Freedom House salutes their efforts, remembers all the lives lost over the last 30 years and calls for the release of all those who have been wrongly jailed or disappeared in China, including Uyghur scholar Ilham Tohti, Christian human rights lawyer Gao Zhisheng, Falun Gong practitioners Liang Xin and Yao Guofu, researcher and blogger Lu Yuyu, Tibetan education activist Tashi Wangchuk, and the nearly 2 million Uyghurs detained in so-called re-education camps. In his Nobel Peace Prize statement, Liu Xiaobo wrote, "For there is no force that can put an end to the human quest for freedom, and China will in the end become a nation ruled by law where human rights reign supreme. I hope and pray that the first current event my own children remember from the news is that the people of China have finally made this hope a reality, and that the people of China are indeed free, flourishing in a nation ruled by law where human rights reign supreme." Thank you.
No CCP, okay? No way.
Thank you, Annie. I'd now like to welcome Francisco Bencosme, who is the Advocacy Manager for the Asia Pacific for Amnesty International USA. Francisco.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to continue the trend of being quick. Thank you for all your patience. I'm with Amnesty International, and I want to point out that over recent weeks, police have detained, placed under house arrest, or threatened dozens of activists who are seeking to mark the June 4th anniversary, as well as relatives of those killed in mainland China. Instead of helping these families find solace and truth, the Chinese government has silenced them, harassed, or detained them. It's the international community's collective failure to hold the Chinese government accountable 30 years ago, which has led to this system of impunity that allows them to commit human rights abuses today. Back then, the Chinese government used tanks and bullets, and today they use surveillance and censorship. The struggles of the Chinese people 30 years ago is shared by the plight of the Uyghurs, Tibetan, and other religious minorities today. The students who sat in protest are the lawyers, activists, union leaders, and human rights defenders that demand our call to action today. The sites for protests are not just happening in mainland China, but in Hong Kong, Taipei, all around the world, and even here in front of the US Capitol. On behalf of Amnesty International, we are here to say that we remember, we will never forget, we will never stop fighting for human rights. The legacy of Tiananmen is not something that belongs just to China or the Chinese people alone. It belongs to the entire international human rights movement. It belongs to the world. Today and in the future, we will all be the tank men standing in front of injustice. In memory of the hundreds of pro-democracy activists who were there on June 4th. Thank you, and we remember.
Thank you, Francisco. I'd now like to welcome Reggie Littlejohn to the stage. Reggie is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, the world's leading organization exposing the violations of women's rights in China and the one-child policy. Thank you, Reggie.
Thank you. 30 years ago today, the Chinese Communist Party crushed innocent people with tanks. And yet, even up to today, they are still crushing innocent people through the one-child policy, now called the two-child policy. The Chinese Communist Party has boasted that they have prevented 400 million lives through the one-child policy. That number, 400 million, is greater than all of the population of the United States and Canada combined. And they have done this through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and infanticide. It has been estimated that 65 million people died as a result of Mao Zedong's creation of the socialist China. Yet even that huge number pales next to the 400 million lives extinguished under the one-child policy. So the number 465 million is the number of deaths that is attributable to the Chinese Communist Party, making the Chinese Communist Party the greatest mass murderer in the history of the world.
1/5 of the population of the world is in China. The world will not be free until China is free. Free China. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. I'd now like to invite Tracy Jiao with the Church of Almighty God.
Hello everyone, I'm a Christian from the Church of Almighty God. And first, I'd like to thank the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation to invite us to co-host this event. The 3 decades since the Tiananmen tragedy have passed in the blink of an eye, but the scenes of the CCP's violent acts of suppression feel just as vivid as yesterday. The Western world had continued to hope that the CCP will express true remorse and acknowledge their error and make a turn toward democracy, or at least admit to the victims' families that they were wrong and provide compensation. However, that has all come to nothing. Not only has the CCP not expressed a shred of remorse, but has become even harsher and more unscrupulous, wantonly repressing and persecuting Democrats and dissidents. In addition, their brutal suppression and persecution of Christians have developed to a point of madness. They are stifling and attempting to eliminate all religions. These things can be found everywhere in today's mainland China. The CCP has interned over 1 million Xinjiang Muslims in concentration camps, carrying out cultural and ethnic genocide against the Uyghur people. They demolished Buddhist and Taoist temples, as well as churches and crosses, confiscate and burn Bibles, and even tamper with scripture, driving out foreign missionaries and arresting Christians. The CCP has carried out a number of special operations targeting the Church of Almighty God and has performed more than 1 million arrests of Christians. The CCP's trampling of human rights